Okay, well, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Evening or afternoon is relative, I suppose. Happy spring break for those who are planning to celebrate it. My name is Neil Safier. I'm the director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies and also associate professor in the history department. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to at least the third of the events in our series called Consumable Commodities. I say at least the third because we had an event that was not formally part of this series last 2 weeks ago, last week. Somewhere between 1 and 15 days ago, let's put it that way. Which was on related to food cultures in the southern Oaxaca region, southern Mexico. And it's been a real pleasure to welcome different people and different kinds of activities and events around food and food cultures through our partnership with the Institute of Brown for Environment and Society as well. So I just wanted to thank everybody for coming and for supporting this series. And I will introduce our filmmaker and discussant more formally after the screening of Raspando Coco, but I wanted to give the opportunity to Pilar Egüez Guevara just to welcome you and to wish us a happy screening. So Pilar.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you everyone for being here. I am excited to share a piece of my work with you today. Thank you to everybody that made this event possible, and I'm really looking forward to talking more about this film afterwards, and then opening it up for a conversation with you about it. So, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the film.
Great, thank you, and what a treat to see the Raspando Coco, and it's a delight to now be able to welcome for the second time Pilar Egüez Guevara to speak to us a little bit about the documentary and her making of it. She is from Ecuador, from Quito. She's a cultural anthropologist, a writer, and an award-winning filmmaker. Over the past 20 years, she's lived, worked, and carried out research and community-based projects in and about Ecuador, Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, and Japan. She's the co-founder and director of Comidas que Curan, Foods That Heal, which is an independent food education and media company dedicated to researching and promoting traditional foods and knowledge through ethnographic research and film. Her award-winning documentaries have been screened in 3 different languages across North America, Latin America, Europe, and Asia. And through the research that she conducts, as well as the public speaking and the films, she amplifies the voices of older women and men who are the bearers of traditional knowledge about food and medicine in Latin America, as you've seen here. She's brought this work to communities in Ecuador through filmmaking and research projects, as well as to U.S. college students in the United States through film screenings and lectures. She's currently a lecturer in the anthropology department of UMass Amherst, and we're delighted to have her with us. Are you going to come to the podium? Do we have mics at the table as well?
We didn't, but we can if you want.
Well, only because I think yeah, maybe while we're probably best to sit here if we can. To begin the conversation with Pilar, we have with us also Diana Buendia, who is another Ecuatoriana from Guayaquil. who is a first-year graduate student in the history department here at Brown. She holds a BA degree in American Studies from the University of Texas at Austin, an MA in journalism from the University of Chicago, an MA in history from the California State University at Los Angeles. She will eventually have an MA in history from Brown, it was Diana who really gave us the idea to invite Pilar here, and so we're thrilled to have Diana as well to begin the conversation, which will then later open up to everybody else. I also want to say a special thanks to our microphone bearers, Eliza Holstein and Maria Isabel Marin. Eliza for not only the communication and the wonderful poster, but also for organizing all of the coconut-infused foods that I hope you had a chance to sample, and Maria Isabel for organizing Pilar's visit. So perhaps we can invite Diana and Pilar to join us at the podium, or at the table.
Hello. Okay, okay. Well, thank you again for being here. I want to ask a special favor. I have a form for you to give me your reaction to the film. It really helps me to spread the word, to share what people's reactions is after watching the film, so it doesn't have to be long. And there's a report here. Thank you in advance. And thank you, everybody, again. Thank you, Neil and Marisabel and Elisa and Diana and our friend Jason for recommending me to you. I just want to give a brief context for this project and how it came about. And it contains some answers to frequent questions I have been asked over the years after I screened the film, so hopefully that answers some of your questions and then open it up to more questions. So how I started this project. This project grew out of a personal experience. As Neil said, I'm originally from Quito, Ecuador, which is the capital, and it's in the highlands. And I came to the US a second time for graduate school for the PhD program at University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign in 2006. And I stayed there for 7 years, and over those long years, I struggled with various health issues, which led me to seek cures or solutions in various types of diets. And in the process, I excluded various food groups, including meat, sugar, and fat from my diet. I ate a lot of raw vegetables and grains in large amounts, and these was nothing like the food I grew up with at all. I really missed the food from Ecuador, but I was committed to trying to cure myself through diet. And in the process, I lost a lot of weight. And in spite of my efforts, after many years, I realized that it wasn't working. So as I was in this process, I came across a book called Nourishing Traditions, which a friend of mine passed along to me, and it's a best-selling book that compiles recipes from around the world, and it's written in English, and it was written by a U.S. author, American woman, and to my surprise, this book included the recipe for quinoa soup, which is a family recipe, like the one that my grandmother used to make. And this recipe included or called for boiling bones for a long time to produce the broth and render the fat, which according to the explanation was really important to assimilate the vitamins and the minerals, especially the vitamins that are soluble in fat. And so I was very surprised to see how the traditional knowledge was validated through this book with Western science and Western categories such as vitamins and minerals, etc. So as I was reading the book, I was having like a brain explosion, and it was really eye-opening to see how much wealth there was in my own family in spite of not having even thought about it, and in my own heritage. And it motivated me to start a project to research the benefits or the wealth of this knowledge in my own community. And at the same time, I was angry at myself. I felt frustrated for not having thought about it earlier and for instead having started looking outside of my heritage, of my community. I didn't even think of talking to my grandmother and my mom and my dad and everybody that I started interviewing after this happened. And in that way, I saw my experience mirroring that experience of other Ecuadorian, many Ecuadorian younger generations that lack interest in traditional foods and favor trendy diets from the US or foods from the US, while at the same time foods from our country or from the global south become trendy and labeled as superfoods in the US. So I thought this was very contradictory. And the more I looked into this research, I realized how much traditional foods had been unfairly discredited by Western medicine and the food industry over the past decades, in spite of the fact that these ideas have already been debunked, and by new research, which in turn simply validates the traditional knowledge and practices that it previously condemned. However, in this process, millions of people throughout the global south and over the course of 5 decades, in the case of fat at least, have been driven away from their traditional foods. And in spite of having been debunked, these outdated ideas, such as the war against traditional fats and coconut, which is the case of the film, these outdated ideas continue to be relevant in Ecuador and other parts of the global south, and continue to turn people away from the resources and cultural knowledge found in their territories and their heritage, depriving them of the benefits that these have for our health and well-being. So I embarked on this project to research my own traditions by integrating it into my postdoctoral research fellowship in the Community Health Department at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, which I started in 2013. So it was between the 13 and the 15. And my project looked at the intersections between nutrition, health, and aging. It had a quantitative component where I was looking at data from a large survey called the Survey of Aging, Health, and Well-Being. And that was a separate, one part of one component of my research. And then the other component was ethnographic. It was based on an ethnographic research carried out in several field sites in Ecuador. So as I mentioned, I started with my own family. I started interviewing my family members, but I also teamed up with friends that had family in other parts of the country. So we covered several field sites throughout the country. And so I sat, in this process, I had the privilege of sitting down for hours to listen to older people, listen to the grandmothers and the older men, and people that grew in the countryside, about how they grew up, like the foods that they grew up eating and the context in which they were eating these foods, and how that changed over time, how they perceived these changes over time and in their transitions from country to city. So the generation that came before me, and then my grandmother generation, they grew up in the countryside for the most part. So this was the key or the value, the treasure in their experiences, that they still remember how the food tastes like, what they were eating, and the context in which they were eating, and how it changed as these areas became urbanized or as they emigrated to the cities. So their memories are a treasure for this research. So based on these interviews, I came up with a series of principles about that I learned from them about traditional cooking and medicinal practices, which I've shared throughout the years in my classes, workshops, interviews, and articles. And I will be happy to expand on that during our conversation if you'd like. Oh, I need to change the. Can I show it? Can I bring the computer here?
Sure.
Maybe?
I don't know how to do. Yeah, probably. See?
All right. Yeah. So based on this research, I created this initiative called Comidas que Curan, which means foods that heal, to document and disseminate traditional knowledge about food and medicinal practices through filmmaking, research, and educational programs. So I really saw this project as a public anthropology project because it was really about sharing it in various different forms with the majority of people possible, and especially reaching the communities. So making sure that this knowledge goes back to the people, right, and to the communities that have made it available, but also that need it the most, because that's where the misinformation lies, and it's really affecting their ability to benefit from this knowledge. So the first project was community-based filmmaking and ethnographic research program directed to youth in the region called Manabí, which is a coastal province just south of Esmeraldas, where the film that you just watched was shot. And this program, it was an educational program where we provided the students, which were youth from the community, the tools in filmmaking and ethnographic research to create their own films about their own traditions. So this resulted in this series of 5 short films featuring older women cooking traditional dishes, which were aired in 2015. And we not only put them out on YouTube, but we created an event where we invited the women that were featured in the film to recognize them and to really make them the center of the event. And the authorities in the city assisted and students attended this event. So that was like the goal of our project, is also to center the women that are the experts and that are usually taken for granted, especially by the younger people. Raspando Coco, it was a parallel research I conducted in Esmeraldas, which is this region that is the northernmost region in Ecuador, close to the border with in the border with Colombia. And I was working on that research during that time, but it took me a while longer to come out with the film. So it came out in 2018. And I can say more about why it took me so long, but it was my first film, so it took a while to air. But those were the first 2 projects, and then 3 years ago I produced a set of new projects in Manabí and Esmeraldas also, which are these 2 coastal provinces, and these aired last year. And this year with support from grants from the National Heritage Institute of Ecuador. And the first 3 is this trilogy of short films co-produced in partnership with, again, youth and women in Calceta, similar to the one that we did years back, where we taught filmmaking and ethnographic skills to youth, and then we had the women be the experts that were teaching them how to make the recipes, and we created this film. And these are on our YouTube channel that you can access, you can watch. Some of them have English subtitles, not all of them yet. I'm always looking or welcoming volunteers that want to subtitle our films. So if you're interested, I'll be glad to get your help in that sense. And then we also came up with two medium-length documentaries, which were aired this year. They are this year. The first one is this film called Salango, A Living Ancestral Legacy, which is a film about the cultural identity tied to the ancestral practices of fishing, collecting mollusks, and culinary traditions of this community, with an emphasis in the cultural significance and the critical state of conservation of several fish species in this village, which is located in the southern region of Manabí. And the latest film is Tarpuna, Guardianes del Coco y el Manglar, Guardians of the Coconut and the Mangrove, which is part of a series of the same name. Tarpuna means to sow in Quechua, which is one of the languages, indigenous languages spoken along the highlands of Ecuador. And this is a series that I produced in partnership with the Seed Savers Network of Ecuador. So I've been working with them for over the past 3 years. They are a network of farmers that produce their food organically, and they are dedicated to preserving the ancestral seeds, the ancestral varieties of seeds, and of the, so with the goal of preserving the diversity and in general produce for food in an organic way. So this film, Guardians of the Coconut and the Mangrove, was conceived as a sequel to Raspando Coco, and I'll say a little more about that in a minute. But there are currently two episodes for this series. Tarpuna el Maíz, which is a film about the foodways and culture surrounding corn amongst indigenous communities in the Andes of Ecuador, and then Tarpuna Coconut and Mangrove, which was aired this year. So just before I finish, I was often asked why I became interested in these sites, or what's my relationship with Esmeraldas. As I've said before, I'm not from there. I'm from Quito, from the capital. So my relationship with Esmeraldas as a child growing up in Ecuador, or growing up in Ecuador, was as a domestic tourist. So people from my area usually go to Esmeraldas beaches for vacation, for holidays, because it's the closest beach to the city, to Quito at least. And so I have memories from vacation going to Esmeraldas, and then afterwards, when I got a master's degree from CLACS, from the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences, in anthropology, and Esmeraldas was my first anthropology field site. So it was my first field site as an anthropologist. I was working with a nonprofit with Afro-Ecuadorian women there in a marginalized neighborhood. And this was my connection to this site for this film many years later, maybe, 7, 8 years later, when I started doing research for Raspando Coco, because the woman that I work with in Esmeraldas is the daughter of Doña Matilde, who is the protagonist of the film. So that was my connection, and I'm often asked, like, why did you decide to make this film, or what triggered? And the answer is, when I was going, both as a child, and then after, when I was doing my research there, I remember people told me they avoided eating coconut, and this was very surprising to me. Like, I was always intrigued by that, because as a tourist, I went there to eat food with coconut. I mean, this is one of the main it's almost like a tourist attraction. It's a very important part of their culinary culture. It's what makes these cuisines, this regional cuisine, distinctive. And so people from all over the Ecuador go there to eat encocado and these foods made with, but the people there avoid it and they are told not to eat it. So I thought, yeah, they're told by the doctors not to eat it. So, and they used to tell them like, no, it's not good for your health, and that's why I don't eat it. So this is the question that triggered like this film, the grounded this film, like why and how people in the largest coconut producing region in Ecuador, where it has such a big significance in the diet and in their culture, it's an important symbol for them. Why are they turning away from this food? And more broadly, over the years, I've realized that there's a lot of guilt and shame that is part of the experience of eating traditional foods in Ecuador, and a lot of these have been for a long time deemed as low, foods of the popular classes or foods of poor people, foods of Indians, or in a denigrating way, or foods of Black people. So there's a lot to be said about, like, the kind of racist system that is at play in how these foods are consumed and the discourses that surround these traditional foods. But this is what triggered my interest in making this film. And as you saw from this film, there's two big answers to that question. The first one is because they're getting outdated. They're still getting medical advice which is outdated, and where this advice comes from is again a bigger topic. It originated in the United States, like the idea of saturated fats causing or being associated with heart problems has the origin in the 1950s United States. So there's U.S. hegemony at play and how it influences the way that public policies throughout the world, but especially in the global South, are conducted, and they're just take the medical advice or the guidelines, or follow the guidelines from the United States unquestionably, and in the process, there's a lot of destruction happening, a lot of damage being caused to people because they're being pushed away. They're being turned away from benefiting from these resources. It's the cultural, so the knowledge and the resources are part of their are intangible heritage that have important benefits to them, and they're being unfairly turned away from that. And so the second part of the question is, or the answer is, why are they turning away? It's because it's expensive. It's gotten expensive over time. So why? So this film, this sequel, is attempt to address that bigger question, or that secondary question, which is, why are prices increasing in this area which is so fertile for coconuts, and how come they have gotten expensive? And that has to do with how coconut is being produced. So this is what a part of the question that we address in this sequel, Tarpuna. Basically, the demand for coconuts has been rising over the past decades due to high demand in the industry, particularly industrialized products, food products in the cities like granola, cookies, and also in the tourism sector. So this price rise reflects the fact that coconut production can't meet this rising demand from urban centers. But also on the supply side, it has been affected due in large part to diseases. So when I talk to people there, I asked them, like, how come it's scarce and it's expensive? And they often told me about the plagues, the diseases, and caused by this beetle, which is the palm weevil, and this insect eats the heart of the palm and kills it. So it's affected. It's been affecting the coconut plantations for a long time, these, I mean, especially I'm talking to people interested in environmental studies. Do you have an idea why this is? Like, why is it affecting the coconut palm plantations? Why are diseases affecting plantations? What in the forms of production? Yes. So it's become a monocrop, right? So it used to be palms used to grow along the coast in wild, in an organic way. People don't even have to plant them. They just grow wild, and all along the beaches they were covered by palms. You don't see that kind of scenery anymore. Like the beaches with a line of palms, it's almost inexistent because they've been taken down. They've taken down the trees to make or create the beaches, but also so they've started producing the coconut palms in other areas that are monocrops, but also the ecosystems have changed. So the piece that we looked at in this film is how the coconut plantation and the mangroves, mangrove ecosystems depend on each other. So some of the birds and the mammals that live in the mangroves used to eat this beetle. And because they have cut down the mangroves, almost 95%, deforestation of mangroves in this area, because of the shrimping industry. So we look at all of these connections, right? Like how is the coconut production being affected because of mangrove deforestation and the impacts that the industry has on that, which is also a big important part of the heritage. Mangroves have been a home for these communities. They're an important natural barrier. They're an important source of food. So it has to do with food sovereignty for these communities. And that's, in summary, what this new film is about. So I will leave it at that, and we can open it up for questions now.
Thank you, Pilar. Thank you for showing us the film and for being here for this thoughtful context. I thought I'd start with a question about how you decided to go into filmmaking as the medium that you wanted to use to tell these important stories about foodways. It seems like it's a deliberate decision not to pursue, the academic sort of route and use the anthropology in the visual filmmaking sense. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so it has to do with this thing I said about public anthropology. So when I came out with my PhD, I was very frustrated in how long it took for articles to get published. I mean, that's what, and it was also frustrating for me that I had to, like, in order to publish research, I had to say things in a language that it's not accessible for most people. It's nobody understands. Like, even my mom, she always reminded me, like, oh, you're writing stuff, like, nobody understands that. I don't understand that. So, like, if my mom, not even my mom can read the stuff that I write, like, why am I doing this? It doesn't make any sense, especially when it's something that is so relevant. It's so vital. Like, I really wanted to communicate this message to the most people possible and to the people in those parts of the country. So I thought that this was the best way. First, I opened up a blog and I started writing blog posts, and I was thrilled. Like, I was able to publish immediately. I didn't have to wait like 3 years for the review board to approve my text, but then I realized that people don't read blogs either, so I thought this was a great way to communicate. So yeah.
I was drawn by some of the things that were said a couple of times in regards to maybe the more national Ecuadorian kind of project of querer lo suyo or estudiar lo nuestro, which seems to be the driving force behind what you're doing now. I wanted you to, maybe you explain this in the context that you just shared, but your relationship to that more broadly, how you see that play into this more like national consciousness as kind of something that Ecuador is not as great as the person that you opened the film with, the chef.
I think it has to do with U.S. hegemony, like with cultural hegemony in general. Like why do we not think of looking at the traditions of the communities and looking into like what your grandmother says, and instead you look outside. You always look to the U.S. and you're giving the U.S. Food industry, and medical an authority that is overwhelming and it's unquestioned. So I think that's the reason why we have this situation. Like the doctor was saying, we shouldn't be looking at science because they're always changing their mind, and yet people continue to go with what the scientific or the medical authorities say, and it goes unquestioned. So I think it's we are trapped in a colonial mindset, and it's really damaging. It's really preventing us from benefiting, from taking advantage from this knowledge that is still alive in the memory of people. People are still cooking like this. People do still remember. So I think breaking with that coloniality of the knowledge about food and medicine is vital, and that's why I do this work.
There also seems to be a tension between this sort of possibility of respecting more the national traditional cultures, the knowledge systems, and one of the women alluded to, we also don't want them to come in here and just take the sort of extractivist notion of coming in to develop esmeraldas as whatever would serve an industry, So I wonder how you think about the relationship between foodways, commodities, extraction as you put together your projects. Is that something that you think about?
All the time, because it's becoming trendy more and more, like traditional foods and traditional cuisines, and there is an extractivist trend going on, like especially from the academic culinary professionals, and it's a big issue because I think it's an issue on two sides. One side is their discourse, the way they talk about traditional food and traditional cuisines as needing improvement. This is I've heard it repeated times, and it's coming from a colonial mindset, because these people, these professionals, the culinary professionals, go to school to learn how to cook, and the mindset or the curriculum is European. It's the point of reference is like very Eurocentric. It's French or whatever European cuisine, and so the traditional food is put up against or read up against these European standards. And so when they talk about traditional foods as, we are going to take it to another level, right? And it's not only going on in Ecuador. There's many examples in other parts of Latin America, like Peru and Bolivia and Mexico, and then the ways that it's been talked about. So I always give this example about, like, I visited some of these schools where they recruit people, like local cooks that are empiric, and they learn and they have their knowledge from their family, and then they're put into this school to learn how to do things properly. And I think to myself, like, what is the proper way to cut vegetables, right? Like, and they are setting these standards, like, okay, it's like you take up out a table, and then this like sharp knife and the very thick knife or whatever kind of knife, and then you cut the vegetables on the table. That's not how my grandmother did it. That's not how most grandmothers do it. Like, my mom didn't do it that way. Can I say that's wrong? I mean, who has the authority to say that that needs improvement, or it's not correct, or you can do it in a better way? It's a Eurocentric mindset. It's there, and those are the ways in which the grandmothers or the women, people for generations have done it. And they have produced spectacular results, because the taste of these foods, I mean, it's already proven to be great, because so many generations tried it, right? So I think that's one level. And another level that has been recently, I've been increasingly aware of, and I mentioned it in one of my films, Salango. We have been documenting the state of conservation of some of the resources. And a lot of this has to do with them becoming popular. So in my words, like, they become gentrified. Like, these traditional foods are gentrified. They become popular in elite circles, in urban centers, and they literally get them to the point of extinction, right? So there's no way that you can do food sovereignty if the resource is literally disappearing. So these are two different ways in which I think there's a lot of damage being carried out, and a lot of improvement that could be happening, because I think these culinary professionals can be a great force to raise awareness, to change the mindset, to really break with this colonial mindset, and also work towards a sustainable practices. I think there are some people doing great work, but I think there's a lot of improvement on that end. Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to open it up, yeah? If anybody has any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I'm one that loves coconut. I have an anaphylactic allergy to milk, and that coconut is my go-to regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Coconut rice, all of those recipes, I appreciate having that shown today. Took pictures of them. Also, I wanted to ask you, have you thought about doing some kind of like podcast? Because that's kind of a way of like the youth kind of listen to a lot of podcasts, and they tend to trend, and maybe using that avenue to reach our youth and like younger generation. Our parents know those recipes, our grandparents know those recipes, but it's getting lost within the younger generation as they Americanize their cuisine. So that's just a thought and a question at the same time.
Thank you. I have it on my list of projects, and I already have many episodes, like all the different episode ideas and interviews. So it's a project that I'm looking for a partner, to produce this podcast for me. But in the meantime, and the other one big decision I need to make is like, do I do it in English or in Spanish, or in both? And that's a lot of work. So because that's always a big dilemma I have with stuff I produce, and films I can get them subtitled and it's easy, but when I write stuff, then I have to get it translated. So I'm always looking for volunteers, like I said earlier. But I want to recommend two podcasts that are in Spanish that I highly recommend. One of them is the podcast of the Seed Savers Network of Ecuador. It's called Radio Semilla, and it's fabulous. It's a fabulous resource. Radio Semilla, yes. And the other one is Carreta de Recetas, which is a podcast about the history of various foods in the Americas. So it's an amazing resource. Yeah, it's an amazing teaching resource. It's in Spanish. Both of them are in Spanish, but they're great resources.
It's a really fascinating film and a wonderful conversation. Sorry, so I wonder if you could say a little bit about sort of how you think of what defines traditional foods and how much of that is about kind of capitalist factory produced things versus not, because obviously we're looking at coconut. That's a thing that's originally not from the Americas at all, thousands of years ago, and we're talking about Afro-Ecuadorians producing this and the traditional foods there, and those all count as traditional, and there's good reasons for that.
Yeah.
But what counts as traditional in this sense, and what are the different dimensions of that, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. I sometimes teach about this, and I ask my students, tell me what's your favorite food, traditional food. I ask them, what's your typical, that food from this region, what in Ecuador? And they say, oh, it's so-and-so made of pork. And I said, oh, okay, is that traditional? Where is this pork came from? And then, it opens up their mind. If you look at many of the, if just looking at the recipes and deconstructing each recipe and looking at where these ingredients came from originally, where they originated, where they were domesticated, and a lot of them, of course, they were introduced with Spanish colonization, right? So in general, when I talk about traditional food, I refer to traditional foods as those after colonization, and even over the past 500 years. And then I refer to the term ancestral to refer to techniques or foods that came before, so pre-Hispanic. In terms of how they blend in with industrialized foods, they are becoming, they are being enmeshed with the traditional recipes like I showed in my film, and I don't edit that out because it's part of how the women do their practice. They do their recipes. They are using, they're not artificial, but they're highly industrialized. For example, that seasoning that one of the women showed on the coconut stew, it comes in a package. And it's mixed, it's a mix of condiments and spices, but it has for example, desiccated chicken broth to enhance the flavor. So it's widespread, the way that they've integrated that into the traditional recipes, the very traditional recipes that come from, maybe hundreds or even thousands of years ago, and they're mixing that in. So I think that's part of what we call culture, right? Culture is always changing, it's always integrating things, and it's part of how people live their life. And from my perspective, I would like to record or document the quote-unquote purely traditional without interference from, but that's not how they're practicing it. So I think my role is also to document their reality, the way that they're doing it nowadays. And so for example, in this project that we carried out, the first one, it's a good example because we were asking these women what are the recipes that you would like to show, and they would choose very complicated recipes and also very typical, that they're very iconic to these regions, because they have their businesses, right? They are hoping to get some visibility, through this about their expertise and if they do so. From my perspective as an anthropologist, I would like them to show me some nearly forgotten recipe, and that is like very homey, right? They're not interested in making that for a film. So I always have to navigate those two perspectives or two sets of interests. My interest as an anthropologist and their interest, their own interest as as the subjects. Mm-hmm.
Hello. In regards to, with my rudimentary knowledge of sometimes culture of medicine and traditional medicine, and how in many cases the industrialization and technological advancements since electricity's discovery and those kind of things have created this different speed of which humans have been able to create these innovations in medicine, and the trial and error that has taken thousands of years for our ancestors to find the best foods for themselves. Do you think Western medicine in any way will or is coming to the point sometime in this near future where it can start to recognize these foods and traditional practices as positive? Or do you think that it's still a far way off for Western medicine to align further and provide a Western explanation in some senses to what these foods really do for the body?
I think both things you mentioned are true. I think they are rediscovering. I mean, it's like a colonial process, like I said. Like they have started to rediscover these foods that have lots of value. Like for example, quinoa. It wasn't a thing until the 80s, and then coconut wasn't a thing until the 2000s, right? So they take it up and then they rebrand it as a superfood. I mean, this is the new category they're using for referring to these foods that are just traditional foods that people all over the global south have been, or in different parts of the world even have been using for hundreds or thousands of years. So it's a process of rebranding and just like again, what you said, like applying the Western terminology and scrutinizing with the Western scientific tools, but it's all about, I think, the partnership with the industry, And sometimes I think that these categories like superfoods, they do more harm than good. I mean, like, because what is a superfood? Like, every food is a superfood. Like, every food has their benefits. And moreover, I think superfoods is misleading because it only focuses on the nutritional contributions of this particular food. But food is so much more than the nutrition and the calories. It's the culture, it's the meaning that it provides. Like, you have emotional ties, you have emotional bonds to people and through the territory, to the land, through this food. It's connected to memories, it's connected to your life history. It contains stories, it contains the stories of individuals and of communities. So all of these are important for health, because belonging and connection are important, are fundamental human needs. And this is what nutritionists don't realize when they ask you to get on a diet and exclude so many different kinds of foods from your diet and disconnect yourself from your community, because you're missing on an opportunity to get healed from that connection. That connection that you have through food is also, it's healing, it's medicinal. But they don't talk about it in that way, and instead they label one food as a superfood just so that you go and buy at the store and think that your health is, is at the other side of your wallet. And it's, because it's also a lot of the psychology is based on fear, like, oh, this food is going to kill you. So they keep contradicting themselves. There's so many mixed messages, and over the years they keep changing their mind about which foods are superfoods and which are the ones that give you cancer. So just so that you, out of fear, go to the store and buy a supplement or buy a food, but they're missing the point. For me, like, I always do a big call to start a diet that is free of guilt, free of shame, and free of fear, because we don't realize how much of an epidemic this is. Like, people are eating with guilt because they get so many mixed messages, and they're missing the point. Like, food is like a lot more than just the nutrients. So
we have our last question and comment.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your film, your work, your story. I was very impacted by it, and I appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Especially to make this accessible to the community.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I wanted to ask maybe to get a better understanding of that shift that happened with the Western medicine of the doctors. When exactly did they start telling people to avoid coco? Because I find it so interesting. Like, I agree that with what you're saying, that this is a time when a lot of Western media or ideas and European notions are kind of brought into places like Ecuador, and how that really impacts and alienates people from their traditional foods that are in fact actually quite healthy. And then I also wanted to ask if you could speak more on if when Ecuador switched to the dollar, the American dollar, if that further alienated people from having access to foods as the economy started to become a big factor. I was in Ecuador, in Quito, in last May, and when I just remember being so shocked to buy a coco, at the mercado, and it was just so much more expensive than what I remember it. Because I do think that there is a lot of people who do remember coco. Like, I was taught coco is such a healthy food. Like, it's something that hace limpieza, drinking coconut water. But it felt like a big barrier was this increase in price. I mean, I know your collaborators spoke to it a bit in terms of seen that the coco is sold at a different price range than when they're receiving. But I think there's also the other side of it, like the people who live in, let's say, in Quito, who are from Esmeraldas, and then are further being isolated by this financial barrier, even though they know the cultural benefits and also the health benefits of it.
I'll start from the last one because it's shorter.
Yeah.
I think dollarization, the context in which dollarization happened was a skyrocketing inflation of the and devaluation of the local currency, which was the sucre. So when they dollarized, it was a further step for inflation. I mean, there was an additional inflation happened because I remember, I don't know if you remember, everything was rounded up to $1 or $5 or $10, and this really made a lot of things expensive. It really hurt a lot of families, and of course it made many of these foods inaccessible. There is a difference between people in the cities and in the regions where these foods are produced, but sometimes, ironically, you can find cheaper fish, for example, in the big markets in Quito compared to in the coast. That's how the market works. And it's unfair for the people in the local areas. And then in regards to your first question, this is part of a bigger talk, and I had the slides here. So in the 1940s, there were some studies by this man. He's a medical doctor, Ansel Keys, and he's the one that came up with the idea based on a study he conducted with data from 7 industrialized countries about the association between saturated fat intake and heart disease. So these, his studies became policy. So he was in a Time magazine in the 60s, and his policy became, or his studies became policy in the 70s. They were part of the guidelines of the American Heart Association, and from there they were exported to the rest of the world. So when I talk about hegemony, that's what I'm referring to. It's like our countries in the global south, they just take up whatever is stated by U.S. authorities, U.S.-based authorities, and in the process, the entire global south was affected, right? Because there's coconut and these animal fats are traditional fats, right? Are high in saturated fat. They were affected by this policy, and I think responsibility is in both ends, because why are the local authorities simply following what the U.S. has to say, right? And they continue to do it. So part of what I found in my research, I think it's not. I think it's blocked. They are reproducing these racist discourses, right? So in continuing this idea that coconut is causing people to die of heart problems, they blame Black people or indigenous people for their cultural preferences. So they get meshed with the racist belief systems to reproduce stereotypes. And yeah, this is how we are. And they continue to be relevant, even though it's already outdated. They already came up with, I had the slide, they already, came up with new studies, and it was on the Time cover that batter is back in the year, I think 2014 it was. But still, this information doesn't reach they still continue to give this outdated medical advice, continue to blame traditional foods for. So why do they do that? I think it's easy. It's easy to blame Black people for their own health problems, because they continue to go to communities with these ideas that they're going to civilize. It's really hard for them to acknowledge that there's some value in the local knowledge, because it's a colonial mindset. So.
Yeah, just we were sort of out of time, but go ahead and maybe that's the last question, and then we can.
Thank you so much for being here. My question is about sort of the information ecosystem and how you see it moving forward. Like, of course, your work kind of inspires into reforming or trying to, have like a little crack in that nut. But I guess, like, as you think of the future of Ecuador, like, what would you think would be like a sustainable way to prevent that misinformation, translate it, making sure everything that gets to the community is culturally competent? Have you thought about it? Like, what would that look like? What kind of partnerships do you do?
Yeah, I have talked about this with my partners in the Seed Savers Network, and we've talked about doing workshops with change agents, who I see as like quote unquote civilizing agents, like nutrition coaches that go to communities, medical doctors that go to communities, chefs get hired to go to communities to teach how communities, like the women, how to cook. And they don't go with an open mind. They go with this mindset that they're going to teach them how to do it because they don't know, they are ignorant. We're going back, we're back 500 years ago, when they're inferiorizing, they're taking them as ignorant people, that they don't know how to take care of themselves, they don't know anything. And so they're coming with this modern knowledge, these trends in nutrition or whatever. So these are the people that do the most harm. So we have really thought about like putting together a program directed to change agents and people that work directly in communities to provide some of these tools, because it basically teach them anthropology. Yeah.
An excellent suggestion for the next iteration of the Consumable Commodities series. So thank you for that question and the response. And also just to let, for those of you who are in attendance, please let us know also what you thought about this and other parts of this series. You can write to clacs@brown.edu and just to sort of open a pathway of communication, because we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. But before we depart, I just want to thank Pilar for making the long trip from central Massachusetts and indirectly Ecuador to be with us for a phenomenal documentary and also really wonderful conversation that obviously connects with so many of the issues that are near and dear to us and those of us who think about not only Latin America, but the broader Caribbean and the Global South and its connections. Thank you to Diana for the questions and comments, and thanks to all of you for coming, and have a wonderful rest of the evening.